As part of a great plan of rewilding Argentina, our legacy group here, they're working to release 2 new jaguars.
Many people have been fascinated by a bold experiment in Argentina where scientists released South America's largest predator into vast swamp waters. What was meant to be a carefully controlled move soon turned into a mysterious event that no one fully expected. As the predator adapted to its new environment, strange changes began to appear, leaving researchers confused and deeply surprised. Now, what really happened inside the swamps? Why are the results so shocking? Could this experiment change how we understand predators in nature forever? Changes in the Ibera ecosystem. It all started in the Esteros del Ibera, the second largest wetland in South America, located in northeastern Argentina. In the Guarani language, the name Ibera means shining waters. The name fits perfectly because this region is full of life and natural beauty. More than 4,000 species of plants and animals live in this vast wetland. It is also home to over 350 species of birds, around 60 species of reptiles, and countless animals such as capybaras, caimans, marsh deer, giant anteaters, giant river otters, and, most importantly, jaguars, the top predators of the ecosystem. For thousands of years, all of these species helped to keep the ecosystem healthy and balanced. However, everything began to change when humans arrived. Throughout the 20th century, large-scale hunting, repeated grassland fires, the growth of cattle ranching, and widespread habitat destruction slowly damaged Ibera. Jaguars were heavily hunted because ranchers saw them as a threat to their livestock. Over time, giant river otters, macaws, and peccaries also disappeared from the area. By the period between the 1930s and 1950s, jaguars had completely vanished from Corrientes and remained absent for nearly 70 years. If you wonder what happens when an ecosystem loses its top predator, Ibera provides a clear answer. The natural balance began to break down. Animals that had once been controlled by jaguars increased rapidly in number, especially capybaras. It is important to remember that capybaras are not invasive animals. They naturally belong to South America and have always been part of the Ibera ecosystem. However, with no jaguars present for almost 70 years, their population grew dramatically. Capybaras are the largest rodents in the world, weighing between 77 and 174 pounds. Today, they often gather in large groups around lakes, rivers, and other water sources. On San Alonso Island, their population density once reached about 129 individuals per square mile, an extremely high number for a large plant-eating animal. A single adult capybara can consume between 6.6 and 8.8 pounds of vegetation every day. When hundreds of capybaras live in the same area, enormous amounts of grass and aquatic plants disappear daily. A 4-year study in Ibera found that areas with large numbers of capybaras had much shorter grass, significantly less plant growth, and major changes in the structure of the grasslands. Birds had fewer places to hide their nests, insects lost important shelter, and even ground temperatures changed. And capybaras were only one example of the wider problems affecting the ecosystem. After decades of hunting, burning grasslands, expanding cattle ranches, and losing key predators, the health of the ecosystem continued to decline. Eventually, people realized that something had to be done. Surprisingly, the effort to save Ibera did not begin with scientists, the Argentine government, or a major international organization. Instead, it was led by Doug Tompkins, the co-founder of The North Face, and later the fashion brand Esprit. During the 1970s and 1980s, he earned millions of dollars through the outdoor clothing and fashion industry. But by the late 1980s, Doug had become convinced that the consumer-focused lifestyle he had helped promote was contributing to the destruction of nature. As a result, he sold most of his shares in Esprit, left the business world behind, and, together with his wife, Christine Tompkins, the former CEO of Patagonia, dedicated his life to an ambitious goal, buying damaged land and restoring entire ecosystems. Their mission quickly attracted attention and controversy. So why were they buying so much land? Were they trying to control important water resources? Was this a hidden attempt by Americans to gain influence over Patagonia? Let's take a closer look. Jaguar Reintroduction Project. Some media outlets even described it as a private kingdom owned by Americans. However, Doug and Christine refused to give up. Starting in the early 1990s, they began buying forests in Patagonia, old cattle ranches, and lands that had been heavily damaged by human activity. Altogether, they helped protect more than 2 million acres of land across Chile and Argentina. In Ibera alone, through the Conservation Land Trust, they purchased about 395,000 acres of former ranch land beginning in 1997. This was equal to nearly 160,000 hectares, and around 150,000 hectares of that land were carefully restored. Later, most of the restored land was given back to the public and became part of today's Ibera National Park, which now covers about 1.7 million acres. As the area recovered, conservationists began focusing on bringing back the animals that had once lived there. One of their biggest goals was the return of the jaguar. The Jaguar project officially started in 2010, but everyone knew it would not be as simple as catching a jaguar and letting it loose in the wild. Conservationists understood that one mistake could cause the entire project to fail within months. A jaguar is very different from animals like deer or capybaras. It is a powerful top predator that needs a large territory, is highly skilled at hunting, and can sometimes come into conflict with people. To prepare for the project, a special reintroduction center was built in 2012 on San Alonso Island, deep within the Ibera wetlands. This large, semi-wild area covered hundreds of acres and was completely separated from human settlements. Here, jaguars could relearn how to survive as truly wild animals. The first jaguars arrived in 2015 from Brazil, Paraguay, Argentina, rescue centers, and other conservation programs across South America. Jaguars were brought from many different places for an important reason. At the time, only about 200 wild jaguars remained in all of Argentina. Their genetic diversity was very limited. If conservationists relied on only one small group to rebuild the population, inbreeding and genetic problems would have been almost unavoidable. But bringing jaguars to Ibera was not the hardest challenge. The real challenge was teaching them to become wild predators again. Human contact was kept as low as possible. The jaguars were not treated like pets and were not fed the way zoo animals are. Instead, they had to hunt capybaras, wild pigs, avertebrates, prey on their own inside the semi-wild enclosure. Every jaguar wore a GPS tracking collar and was monitored daily using camera traps. If a jaguar became too comfortable around people or failed to learn proper hunting skills, it was not released into the wild. Conservationists knew that predators that lose their natural instincts often turn to farm animals for food. If that happened, a project designed to restore nature could quickly turn into a serious problem for local communities. In 2018, the project reached a major breakthrough. For the first time in nearly 70 years, 2 jaguar cubs were born in Corrientes. One of them was named Arami, a Guarani name meaning a piece of sky. Arami soon became a symbol of the new generation of jaguars returning to Ibera. Other important jaguars also played key roles in the program. Mariwa, a female from Brazil, helped establish the first breeding population. Jatobazinho, a male jaguar, helped increase the project's genetic diversity. These animals were much more than just individual jaguars. They became living proof that Ibera's ecosystem was slowly coming back to life. Then came the moment conservationists had been waiting for. In 2021, jaguars were released back into the wild in Ibera after being absent from Corrientes for around 70 to 80 years. By 2022, about 8 jaguars were already living freely in the region. But this success also brought new challenges. Many local residents were not just worried about the jaguars themselves. They feared losing cattle, losing grazing areas, harming their businesses, and giving up control of land that their families had lived and worked on for generations. So what did the conservationists do before bringing jaguars back? Was it necessary? Let's find out. Restoration of Ibera ecosystem. Before conservationists were ready to bring jaguars back to the Ibera wetlands, they decided to test their restoration efforts with a much smaller animal first, the giant anteater. This was an important step because no one knew for certain whether animals that had disappeared from the region could successfully return and survive in the wild again. The first giant anteater chosen for the project was a female named Ivotipora. She had suffered a difficult start in life after being captured and illegally trafficked. Fortunately, she was rescued and given a second chance. In 2007, conservationists released her into the Ibera wetlands, hoping she would adapt to life in the wild. At the time, there were many doubts. Scientists did not know if she would find enough food, avoid dangers, or live long enough to reproduce. To the surprise of many people, Ivotipora did far more than simply survive. She thrived in her new home. Over the next 15 years, she lived freely in the wetlands and gave birth to 7 offspring. Her success became a major milestone for the restoration project. In many ways, she became the founder of a completely new giant anteater population in Ibera. As the years passed, the results became increasingly impressive. By 2022, hundreds of giant anteaters were living in the region. At least 2 healthy and self-sustaining populations had become established, meaning the animals were reproducing and surviving without needing constant human assistance. This achievement gave conservationists confidence that larger and more ambitious rewilding projects could also succeed. Following the success of the giant anteaters, many other species began returning to the wetlands. Pampas deer once again roamed the vast grasslands. Collared peccaries, which had disappeared from the area, were reintroduced and started rebuilding their numbers. Colorful red and green macaws returned to the skies, bringing life and movement back to parts of the landscape where they had been absent for generations. Another important project focused on the giant river otter. This powerful aquatic predator had vanished from Ibera decades earlier. Conservationists worked hard to restore the species, carefully breeding and preparing otters for release. By 2024, the program had around 13 giant river otters living in a special pre-release enclosure. The project had also recorded the birth of 7 cubs, showing that the animals were adapting well and beginning to establish a future in the region. Even with all these successes, however, the ecosystem was still not fully restored. Many important animals had returned, but one critical piece was still missing. Large herbivores, especially capybaras, continued to increase rapidly in number. Without a major predator to keep their populations in check, these animals could spread across the wetlands in huge groups and consume large amounts of vegetation. Species such as giant anteaters and giant river otters played valuable roles in the ecosystem, but they could not control large herds of capybaras. The wetlands needed something more powerful, a top predator capable of influencing the entire landscape and maintaining balance among many different species. That missing animal was the jaguar. When jaguars were finally reintroduced, the effects began appearing much sooner than scientists had expected. Interestingly, the success of the project was not simply about how many animals the jaguars hunted. The real change was much deeper than that. Research using GPS tracking collars and camera traps showed that capybaras quickly became one of the jaguar's main prey species. Jaguars also hunted feral hogs, peccaries, and marsh deer. Reports from the rewilding program revealed that capybaras and feral hogs made up a significant portion of the diet of the reintroduced cats. However, the most important impact was not the number of prey animals being killed. The true transformation came from the return of fear to the wetlands. For years, animals like capybaras had lived without worrying about a powerful predator. Once jaguars returned, their behavior began to change. They became more cautious about where they fed, rested, and traveled. As a result, the entire ecosystem started functioning differently. Vegetation had a better chance to recover in some areas, animal movements changed, and natural ecological processes began returning. In other words, the jaguar was helping restore balance not only through hunting, but simply through its presence. The return of South America's largest predator was reshaping Ibera in ways that scientists had long hoped for but had not expected to see so quickly. How did it return? And why? Let's find out. The return of jaguars. For almost 70 years, capybaras lived in Ibera without having to worry about jaguars. Large groups of these animals could often be seen gathering in open grasslands and wetlands, calmly feeding for hours. Since the region's top predator had disappeared long ago, there was little to stop their numbers from growing or to influence where they spent their time. It seemed as if no powerful force was guiding the balance of nature anymore. However, everything began to change when jaguars were returned to the ecosystem. Scientists quickly noticed important differences in the behavior of the capybaras. Instead of staying in one place and grazing for long periods, they started moving around more often. They became more cautious and spent less time feeding in areas where jaguars were known to roam. Many groups even avoided locations where jaguars appeared regularly. This change is known as top-down regulation. It happens when a predator at the top of the food chain influences the behavior and population of animals below it, creating effects that spread throughout the entire ecosystem. In Ibera, researchers soon began to see the results of this process. As capybaras reduced their grazing in certain areas, the vegetation had a chance to recover. Grasses that had once been heavily eaten began growing taller and thicker. Plant life became healthier and more abundant, and the grasslands slowly regained a greater variety of plant species and natural structures. These changes were extremely important for many other forms of life. Taller grasses provided safer nesting places for birds that live in grasslands. Insects, small mammals, reptiles, and other tiny creatures gained more shelter and protection from predators. The wetlands also benefited because stronger vegetation helped stabilize the environment and supported a wider range of wildlife. Scientists believe the effects could extend even further. Reduced grazing pressure may improve the way nutrients move through the ecosystem. It could also increase the amount of carbon stored in plants and soil, helping the environment absorb more greenhouse gases. Some researchers even think these changes might influence how wildfires behave in the future by affecting the amount and condition of vegetation across the wetlands. But just as Ibera was showing some of its strongest signs of recovery, a new and frightening challenge appeared. Could Ibera survive climate change? If it survives, how will it recover? Let's find out. Ibera wildfires and ecotourism revival. In early 2022, the province of Corrientes and the entire Ibera region suffered one of the most severe wildfire seasons in modern Argentine history. Months of drought, unusually high temperatures, and powerful winds created conditions that local residents had rarely, if ever, witnessed before. This was especially alarming because Ibera is a wetland ecosystem. Under normal conditions, the area contains so much water that large fires struggle to spread. But during this extreme drought, vast amounts of grass and dead vegetation dried out completely. What was usually a water-rich landscape suddenly became a huge source of fuel for fire. The consequences were devastating. Within only a few weeks, wildfires burned more than 2.5 million acres across Corrientes province, an area equal to roughly 10% of the entire province. In Ibera National Park alone, nearly 60% of the park was affected by fire and drought. The disaster threatened years of conservation work. Areas where vegetation had been restored were damaged. Important habitat corridors connecting wildlife populations were affected. Many of the animals that had been successfully reintroduced to the region suddenly faced serious danger. Giant anteaters, pampas deer, capybaras, water birds, and even jaguars were at risk. conservationists became deeply concerned about the survival of some animals. Several individuals carrying GPS tracking collars had to be monitored urgently so researchers could confirm that they were still alive and had escaped the flames. By 2024, Ibera had about 33 jaguars living freely in the wild, and around 12 cubs were born that same year. This was a major turning point because a predator is only truly back when it can breed on its own without human help. These cubs were not released animals. They were born in the wetlands, raised among capybaras, learned to hunt real prey, and lived in a fully wild environment. By around 2026, reports from Argentina said there were at least 50 jaguars in the Ibera ecosystem. At this point, Ibera was not only recovering in nature, it was also starting to bring back the local economy. In the past, the region depended mostly on cattle farming, hunting, and using wetland resources. Many nearby towns had little tourism, few steady jobs, and many young people had to leave to find work. But as jaguars, giant anteaters, giant river otters, and macaws returned, tourists started coming back too. Slowly, Ibera became one of Argentina's fastest-growing ecotourism areas. New jobs began to appear around the wetlands: wildlife guides, safari boat drivers, park rangers, camera trap workers, birdwatching guides, eco-lodge staff, and wildlife photography tour guides. The organization Rewilding Argentina also helped build trails, campsites, and tourism facilities in nearby communities, so locals could directly benefit. Some former hunters even became guides who now help visitors find jaguars in the wild. The respected Time magazine also named Ibera one of the world's great places because of this recovery, which brought more international tourists, filmmakers, and birdwatching groups to Corrientes. The jaguar slowly became one of Ibera's most valuable natural assets. A living jaguar now brings in more money through tourism than cattle ever could from hunting losses. So, what do you think about the release of South America's largest predator into its swamps? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe.